1. Cheating or sleeping with other people during breaks they initiated. We don't talk about this, but avoidants are notorious for using no contact as a way to satisfy their desire to sleep with other people. The avoidant creates ambiguous relational status through their withdrawal patterns, their suggestions for space or breaks that lack clear definition, their unilateral decisions to decrease contact or involvement without explicit conversation about what decreased involvement means for the relationship's exclusivity or commitment. This manufactured ambiguity serves the avoidant's defended needs by allowing them to regulate their anxiety about intimacy through distance. While maintaining your availability as option, they can return to when their anxiety subsides or when their attempts to meet needs elsewhere prove unsatisfying. Yet this same ambiguity creates conditions where the avoidant can justify behavior that violates relational agreements and trust, most devastatingly, sexual or romantic involvement with others during periods of separation that you understood as temporary cooling-off period within continuing relationship, while the avoidant interpreted as freedom to pursue whatever they desired without accountability. The unacceptable nature of this behavior emerges not from the sexual or romantic involvement itself in contexts where relationship has definitively ended with mutual understanding, but rather from the avoidance exploitation of ambiguity they created to serve their needs while disregarding impact on you. The avoidant initiates break without clearly communicating whether the break means the relationship is over, whether exclusivity still applies, whether they are free to involve themselves with others. They rely on your assumption that break means temporary space within continuing committed relationship, while they operate under interpretation that break means freedom from commitment and from expectations of exclusivity. This intentional or negligent failure to clarify creates situation where you remain faithful and emotionally invested during separation while the avoidant pursues connections with others, returning after the break expecting to resume the relationship while having violated what you reasonably believed were continuing agreements about fidelity and commitment. The behavior becomes particularly unacceptable when the avoidant initiated the break specifically to create cover for involvement with someone else they were already considering or pursuing. The avoidant who suggests needing space or time to think may be manufacturing justification to explore other option without technically cheating, creating window of ambiguous relational status during which they can pursue someone else while maintaining plausible deniability about whether their behavior constitutes betrayal. If the new involvement proves unsatisfying or if the other person rejects them, the avoidant returns to you having used the break as insurance policy that kept you available while they tested other possibilities. You discover after the fact that the break was not about the avoidant needing space to process their feelings or to work on themselves, but was rather about creating opportunity to involve themselves with someone else without consequence. The profound harm this behavior causes emerges through multiple dimensions beyond the sexual or romantic betrayal itself. The avoidance use of ambiguity to serve their interests while disregarding yours demonstrates that they prioritize their defended needs and desires over your emotional well-being, that they are willing to exploit unclear situations in ways that benefit them even when such exploitation harms you, that they lack basic respect for you as person deserving of clear communication about relationship status and expectations. The behavior reveals that the avoidant views you as option to be kept available rather than as partner deserving of honesty and consideration, that they manage their own anxiety and desires without regard for how their choices affect you. The discovery that the avoidant slept with someone else during break they initiated also destroys your ability to trust their motivations for future requests for space or distance. You can no longer take at face value the avoidance claims about needing time to process feelings or to work on themselves, because you now know that such claims may serve as cover for pursuing others while keeping you as backup option. The avoidance exploitation of one break's ambiguity contaminates all future attempts at communication about needing space, making it impossible to honor their stated needs without wondering whether those stated needs disguise actual intentions to pursue others while maintaining your availability. The behavior also forces recognition about the avoidant's character and their approach to relationships that extends beyond this specific betrayal. Someone who exploits ambiguity to justify behavior that serves their interests while harming yours, who fails to communicate clearly about fundamental relationship agreements like exclusivity during separation, who returns expecting to resume relationship after violating what reasonable person would understand as continuing commitment, demonstrates they lack integrity and respect that healthy partnership requires. The avoidant has shown they will prioritize their desires over your dignity, that they will use technicalities and ambiguity to justify behavior they know would hurt you, that they cannot be trusted to act with basic consideration for your emotional well-being when their desires conflict with that well-being. This behavior is unacceptable and should not be tolerated, because tolerating it communicates that you accept being treated as option rather than as priority, that you will remain available despite being disrespected and betrayed, that the avoidant faces no genuine consequence for exploiting relationship ambiguity to serve themselves while harming you. The appropriate response involves permanent ending of the relationship, regardless of the avoidant's explanations or justifications about the break's ambiguous nature, regardless of their claims that they thought the break meant they were free to see others, regardless of their apparent regret after the fact. Someone who would exploit ambiguous situation in these ways lacks the character, integrity, and basic respect that any healthy relationship requires as foundation. The behavior reveals who the avoidant is at fundamental level. Someone who will prioritize their defended needs and desires over your well-being, someone who cannot be trusted with your heart, someone whose patterns extend beyond attachment style into basic failures of character that no amount of patience or understanding on your part can remedy. Number 2, refusing to defend you in front of friends and family. The avoidant demonstrates pattern of failing to support you or to defend you when others criticize you, disrespect you, or treat you poorly in social contexts where the avoidant is present and has both opportunity and obligation to protect you or to advocate for you. The avoidant remains silent when their friends make disparaging comments about you, when their family members treat you dismissively or critically, when others in their social circle engage in behavior or speech that disrespects you or your relationship. This silence communicates multiple devastating messages: that the avoidant agrees with the criticism or disrespect, that maintaining comfort in their social relationships takes priority over protecting your dignity, that they lack sufficient investment in you to risk any social awkwardness or conflict that defending you would create, that you are not important enough to them to warrant their public advocacy or support. The unacceptable nature of this behavior emerges through what it reveals about the avoidant's priorities and their fundamental respect for you as partner. Basic loyalty in intimate relationship requires that partners defend each other's dignity and well-being when others attack or undermine it, that partners demonstrate publicly that they stand with each other, that partners refuse to allow others to disrespect someone they claim to care about. The avoidant's failure to defend you demonstrates they prioritize being conflict avoidant and maintaining their comfort in social settings over your fundamental dignity as person deserving of respect. They are willing to sacrifice your well-being and your sense of being supported to avoid the temporary discomfort of addressing others' inappropriate behavior toward you. The behavior becomes particularly unacceptable when the avoidant's silence in face of others' disrespect toward you contrasts with their willingness to confront you about your behavior or to criticize you privately. The avoidant who will not defend you when their mother makes critical comments about you has no difficulty telling you later that you were too sensitive or that you misinterpreted the comments, placing responsibility on you for being hurt rather than addressing that their mother's behavior was inappropriate and that they should have intervened. This differential response, confronting you while avoiding confronting others on your behalf, exposes that the avoidant reserves their confrontational capacity for the person who has least power to harm them, you, who they know will tolerate their criticism, while refusing to use that capacity to protect you from people whose displeasure they fear, their friends or family, whose judgment matters more to them than your sense of being supported. The refusal to defend you in public also forces you into impossible position where you must choose between protecting yourself by addressing disrespect directly, which often makes you appear aggressive or oversensitive when you lack your partner's support, or tolerating disrespect to avoid creating scene that your partner's silence has indicated they do not want created. If you defend yourself without the avoidance support, you risk being characterized as the problem, as overreacting, as unable to take joke, or to handle family dynamics. If you remain silent as the avoidant does, you internalize disrespect and build resentment toward both the people who disrespected you and toward the partner who failed to defend you. The avoidant's refusal to defend you creates no win situation where either choice damages your dignity and your sense of being in partnership with someone who protects you. The pattern also reveals itself in less obvious ways beyond direct defense in moments of explicit disrespect. The avoidant fails to establish appropriate boundaries with others about how you should be treated, fails to communicate to their friends and family that you matter to them and should be treated with corresponding respect, fails to integrate you appropriately into their social world in ways that signal your significance to them. They keep you separate from important people in their life, introduce you ambiguously or minimally, fail to claim you publicly as important partner, avoid discussing the relationship or your role in their life with others. This pattern of keeping you peripheral rather than integrated communicates to their social circle that you are not particularly important, that you can be treated casually or dismissively, that respecting you is not priority because the avoidant has not established through their behavior that you merit such respect. The avoidant's refusal to defend you also becomes unacceptable through how it affects your sense of safety and security in the relationship. You need to know that your partner will protect you, that they have your back, that they will not allow others to harm you without consequence. The avoidant's demonstrated pattern of prioritizing their social comfort over your dignity destroys this necessary sense of safety. You cannot relax into the relationship knowing that your partner will sacrifice you to avoid conflict with others, that you are essentially alone in navigating their social world, that you cannot count on them to support you when you need support, because their defended avoidance of discomfort takes precedence over your well-being. This behavior is unacceptable and should not be tolerated because tolerating it requires accepting that you are not priority to your partner, that your dignity is less important than their comfort, that you must navigate their social world without their support or protection. The appropriate response involves establishing clear expectation that defending you when others disrespect you is non-negotiable requirement of continuing the relationship, that their failure to do so communicates lack of basic respect and loyalty that partnership requires. If the avoidant cannot or will not defend you, if they continue prioritizing conflict avoidance over your dignity, if they continue allowing others to disrespect you without consequence, the relationship should end because you deserve partner who demonstrates through their actions that you matter enough to them to warrant their advocacy and protection, who values you enough to risk temporary social discomfort to defend your dignity, who stands with you publicly rather than leaving you to face disrespect alone while they maintain their defended silence. Number 3, lying to avoid difficult conversations they find uncomfortable. The avoidant demonstrates consistent pattern of using deception as primary strategy for managing relational situations they experience as uncomfortable, threatening, or likely to generate conflict or emotional intensity they feel unable to navigate. The lies range from small deceptions about their whereabouts or activities to significant fabrications about their feelings, their intentions, or their behavior that directly affects the relationship's foundation. The avoidant lies not because they gain material benefit from deception, but rather because lying allows them to avoid conversations that would require vulnerability, that might generate your disappointment or hurt, that could lead to conflict or emotional expression they lack capacity to manage. The deception serves as defensive mechanism that protects the avoidant's comfort while fundamentally undermining the trust that intimate relationship requires to function. The unacceptable nature of this behavior emerges through how systematically it destroys the possibility of genuine intimacy and secure partnership. Intimate relationship requires foundation of trust, where both parties can rely on each other's honesty, even when honesty involves sharing difficult truths, where partners believe what each other says without constant need for verification, where communication can be taken at face value rather than requiring detective work to uncover actual reality beneath presented fiction. The avoidance pattern of lying demolishes this foundation by teaching you that you cannot trust what they say, that their words do not reliably correspond to reality, that you must maintain constant vigilance and skepticism about whether they are telling truth or are crafting narrative that serves their defensive need to avoid discomfort. The lying becomes particularly damaging when it involves the avoidant's feelings, their commitment level, or their behavior that directly affects you and the relationship. The avoidant tells you they see future with you when they actually feel ambivalent about the relationship's continuation, lying to avoid conversation about their doubts because such conversation would be uncomfortable and might lead to breakup. They are not ready to initiate, despite not wanting to continue. They claim they were working late when they were actually spending time with someone you have expressed concern about, lying to avoid conversation about appropriate boundaries, because addressing your concerns would require them to acknowledge your feelings matter and to potentially limit their autonomy in ways they resist. They say they are fine when they are actually upset or withdrawn, lying to avoid emotional conversation that would require them to be vulnerable about what they feel and why they feel it. Each lie, regardless of its apparent magnitude, trains you to distrust the avoidance communication and to rely instead on reading their behavior, on gathering evidence, on detective work that should not be necessary in relationship with honest partner. You find yourself checking their stories for consistency, looking for evidence that confirms or contradicts what they have told you, asking questions designed to reveal lies rather than believing their answers. This hypervigilance exhausts you while degrading the fundamental quality of the relationship. You are in relationship with someone you must monitor rather than trust, someone whose words you must verify rather than accept, someone who treats you as person to be managed through deception rather than as partner deserving of truth even when truth is difficult. The avoidance lying also represents profound disrespect because it demonstrates they prioritize their temporary comfort over your right to make informed decisions based on accurate information. When the avoidant lies about their feelings about the relationship, they deprive you of information you need to make informed choice about whether to continue investing. When they lie about their behavior, they deprive you of information you need to establish appropriate boundaries. When they lie about their whereabouts or activities, they deprive you of information you need to assess whether they are meeting basic expectations of partnership. The lying reveals that the avoidant values their ability to avoid uncomfortable conversations more than they value your autonomy and your right to make decisions based on reality rather than on fiction they have constructed. The pattern typically escalates because lying successfully helps the avoidant avoid discomfort in short term, reinforcing the behavior through negative reinforcement, where lying prevents the negative experience of difficult conversation. The avoidant learns that lying works. It allows them to maintain relationship while avoiding vulnerability, prevents conflict or emotional expression they fear, lets them keep their options open or their behavior unconstrained without facing your response to knowing truth. Each successful lie makes next lie more likely because the avoidant internalizes that deception is effective strategy for managing relational discomfort. The escalation continues until either you discover pattern of lying and confront it, or until the avoidance web of deceptions becomes unsustainable and collapses under weight of contradictions. The discovery of the lying creates particular damage because it forces you to question everything the avoidant has told you, to wonder how much of the relationship was based on truth versus on narratives constructed to manage your perception and prevent difficult conversations. You must reassess the entire relationship history through lens of knowing the avoidant is willing to lie to avoid discomfort. Were their expressions of love honest or performed? Were their commitments genuine or tactical? Was their presented self authentic or character they played to maintain the relationship while avoiding actual intimacy their honesty would require? This forced reassessment destroys not just present trust, but also corrupts past experiences that you believed were genuine, but now must question. This behavior is unacceptable and should not be tolerated because tolerating it requires accepting relationship with someone who treats you as person to be managed rather than as partner deserving of truth, who values their defended comfort over your dignity and your autonomy, who has demonstrated they cannot be trusted to communicate honestly even about matters that directly affect your well-being and your decisions. The appropriate response involves ending the relationship because trust once systematically destroyed through pattern of lying cannot be rebuilt. Even if the avoidant promises to be honest going forward, you have no way to verify that promise given their demonstrated willingness to lie when truth feels uncomfortable. You deserve partner who tells difficult truths even when doing so creates temporary discomfort, who respects you enough to allow you to make informed decisions based on reality, who understands that honesty is non-negotiable foundation of intimate partnership regardless of how uncomfortable honest communication sometimes feels. Number 4, playing the victim while contributing minimal effort to the relationship. The avoidant demonstrates pattern of characterizing themselves as wronged party in the relationship while simultaneously providing minimal investment, minimal emotional availability, minimal consistency, and minimal effort toward meeting your needs or maintaining the partnership. When you express hurt about their patterns, when you establish boundaries about behavior that harms you, when you communicate needs that remain unmet, the avoidant responds by positioning themselves as victim of your pressure, your demands, your inability to accept them as they are. They transform legitimate feedback about their inadequate contribution into narrative where they are being attacked, criticized unfairly, or subjected to unreasonable expectations that justify their defensive withdrawal or their continued minimal investment. The unacceptable nature of this behavior emerges through how effectively it inverts reality and eliminates the avoidant's accountability for their patterns while simultaneously silencing your legitimate needs and concerns. You are providing majority of relational labor, initiating most contact, planning activities, managing emotional temperature, accommodating their defended limitations, remaining patient with their inconsistency. You are receiving minimal reciprocation, sporadic availability, defended emotional distance, frequent withdrawal, lack of initiative in maintaining connection. Yet when you attempt to address this imbalance by expressing your needs or by establishing boundaries, the avoidant responds as if they are the injured party, as if your reasonable expectations constitute attack on them, as if your hurt about their patterns represents your failure to accept their authentic self. The victim positioning serves multiple defensive functions for the avoidant. First, it deflects attention from their inadequate contribution by making the conversation about how they feel victimized rather than about the legitimate concerns you raised. Your attempt to discuss their lack of effort becomes conversation about how they feel pressured by your expectations. Your expression of hurt about their withdrawal becomes conversation about how they feel attacked when you are being emotional. The avoidance successfully redirects focus from their behavior and its impact on you to their feelings about your response to their behavior, ensuring the actual issue, their minimal investment, and its toll on you never receives adequate address. Second, the victim positioning generates your guilt and your caregiving response in ways that prevent you from maintaining boundaries or continuing to advocate for your needs. When the avoidant characterizes your legitimate needs as unreasonable pressure, when they present themselves as hurt by your expectations, when they suggest that your feedback makes them feel inadequate or attacked, you feel guilty for having needs at all. Your natural empathy and your characteristic pattern of accommodating the avoidant gets activated, leading you to comfort them, to reassure them, to soften your position. The avoidant has successfully transformed situation where they should be accountable for their inadequate effort into situation where you are comforting them about how hard your needs make things for them. The manipulation is extraordinarily effective because it exploits your caring nature against your own interests. Third, the victim positioning allows the avoidant to justify their continued minimal investment by characterizing any increased effort as capitulation to your unreasonable demands rather than as appropriate contribution to mutual partnership. The avoidant can maintain their defended position by framing your needs as pressure they must resist rather than as legitimate requirements of relationship they claim to value. By positioning themselves as victim of your expectations, the avoidant makes their minimal effort appear to be boundary setting or self-protection rather than what it actually represents: inadequate partnership contribution that any relationship requires to function. The pattern becomes particularly unacceptable when the avoidance victim positioning involves comparing your legitimate needs to actual abuse or manipulation, suggesting that your requests for consistency, emotional availability, or reciprocation constitute controlling behavior or emotional manipulation. The avoidant characterizes your communication about unmet needs as pressure, your boundaries as punishment, your hurt as emotional manipulation, your expectations as demands. This reframing distorts the nature of healthy relationship communication, presenting normal relationship needs and feedback as toxic behavior, while allowing the avoidant to position their defended inadequacy as reasonable response to your supposed mistreatment of them. The victim positioning also prevents any possibility of the avoidant examining their patterns or taking accountability for how their defended limitations affect you. Someone who sees themselves as victim of their partner's unreasonable expectations cannot simultaneously see themselves as person whose behavior harms their partner and who needs to make changes. The victim narrative protects the avoidant from accountability by ensuring they remain focused on how they are being wronged rather than on how their patterns create legitimate harm. The avoidant can maintain this victim stance indefinitely because any attempt you make to address their patterns gets processed through their filter as further evidence of the pressure or attack they claim to experience, reinforcing their narrative rather than penetrating it. The devastating impact of this pattern emerges through how completely it silences your voice and invalidates your experience. You cannot express hurt without the avoidant transforming your hurt into their victimization. You cannot establish boundaries without the avoidant characterizing those boundaries as evidence you are being controlling. You cannot advocate for your needs without the avoidant positioning your needs as unreasonable demands they must resist. The relationship becomes completely one-sided, where you provide maximum accommodation, while your legitimate needs for reciprocation get characterized as pressure that justifies the avoidant's minimal investment. You find yourself apologizing for having needs, feeling guilty for expecting partnership contribution, suppressing your own hurt to avoid triggering the avoidance victim response. This behavior is unacceptable and should not be tolerated because tolerating it requires accepting relationship where you have no voice, where your needs do not matter, where the person providing minimal effort successfully positions themselves as wronged party while you exhaust yourself providing maximum effort. The appropriate response involves recognizing that someone who plays victim in response to your legitimate relationship needs, while contributing minimal effort themselves, lacks both the self-awareness and the character that healthy partnership requires. You cannot build mutual relationship with someone who positions themselves as victim of your expectations for mutuality, who characterizes your needs as attacks they must defend against, who manipulates your empathy to avoid accountability for their inadequate contribution. The relationship should end because you deserve a partner who takes responsibility for their behavior and its impact, who responds to your needs by attempting to meet them rather than by positioning themselves as victimized by having to hear about them, who contributes equitably rather than providing minimal effort, while characterizing any request for more as unreasonable pressure.